My daughter calls. Another woman, Mom. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, unrelenting drizzle that blurred the edges of the world outside my window. I sat curled on the edge of the worn sofa, my fingers tracing the rim of a cold mug of tea I hadn't touched in nearly an hour. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional sigh of the wind rattling the old window panes. Yet inside me, a storm raged far louder than the weather could ever dare to compete with. I had been home all afternoon, waiting for her to come back from school. My little girl, my heart, my shadow, my joy. She was supposed to run into my arms the moment the bus doors opened, her small hands reaching for mine, her hair wet from the rain, cheeks flushed from running through puddles. But today, when the bus rolled to a stop, and she leapt off with the other children, it wasn't me she ran toward. I stood frozen at the doorway, the weight of something I could not name pressing down on my chest. She ran past me, laughing, a sound so familiar yet so distant now, and she wrapped herself in the arms of a woman standing there, smiling at her in that soft, effortless way I had once only imagined for myself. The woman's hair glistened with raindrops, and her eyes held a warmth that made my daughter's face light up in a way mine hadn't in months. Mom. My daughter called, her voice ringing with certainty, with devotion, with a belonging I no longer held. I watched, rooted to the spot, as my heart fractured into pieces I didn't even know could break. I should have stepped forward, spoken her name, pulled her back to me. But my throat had turned to stone, my feet heavy with despair. I swallowed a sob, tried to steady myself, but it was too late. The moment had passed, and she was already lost in someone else's arms. I remember standing there, as she waved goodbye to her new mother, the woman who wasn't me, and stepped onto the porch with her own motherly smile. I could feel my chest tighten, each beat a reminder that I had been replaced in the most intimate, sacred corner of my life. Every laugh, every hug, every whispered, "I love you," that should have belonged to me now belonged to someone else. Someone who didn't carry the sleepless nights, the endless worry, the years of small sacrifices that had been mine alone. Inside, I felt the familiar ache of rejection, the bitter taste of inadequacy. But it was sharper now because it wasn't abstract. It was real, and it was happening right before my eyes. I had always thought that my love for her was unshakable, that no force in the world could ever sever the bond we shared. And yet, here I was learning the hardest truth. A parent can face love alone was not enough. Later that evening, I lingered at the dinner table, long after the dishes had been cleared. Her absence was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders. I could still hear her laughter, echoing in my mind, that bright, unguarded sound that once filled every corner of this home. I reached for the photo frames on the mantel, tracing my finger over pictures of her smiling at birthdays, at school events, at the park. I remembered the way her little hand fit perfectly in mine. The way she used to call my name in a songy, earnest way that made my heart swell with pride and love. Now, those memories felt like relics from a life that no longer existed. The reality was harsher. She had chosen another mother, another home, another life where my presence was optional, at best. And though I knew it wasn't her fault. Children don't choose with the cruelty of intention. I couldn't stop the wave of despair from consuming me. I curled into myself on the sofa, clutching a pillow to my chest, letting the tears fall freely. Each one carried a piece of my heart, a fragment of the love I thought was unshakable. Sleep came fitfully that night, broken by dreams of her tiny hands, slipping from mine, of laughter that wasn't mine to hear. I woke to an empty room, the morning light weak and pale, as if even the sun refused to shine fully on this new reality. I dressed slowly, mechanically, my mind spinning with questions that had no answers. How could she call another woman mom? Was it because I had failed somewhere, even in ways I could not see? Or was it simply the cruel inevitability of life, teaching me a lesson in loss I wasn't ready to learn? At school pickup the next day, I forced a smile, hugged her briefly, and tried to mask the pain behind a facade of cheerfulness. She looked up at me with bright eyes, and I felt a stab of longing that cut deeper than anything else. She didn't ask me to call her new mother anything, but the bond, the affection, the certainty in her eyes when she spoke to that woman, it was louder than words. It was there, and I could not compete with it. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it were the only thing tethering me to reality. My mind replayed every moment, every smile, every word, and the truth settled like a stone in my chest. My daughter was slipping away, not with anger or malice, but with the quiet, irreversible certainty of a child who had found someone new to love. I knew I had to survive this, somehow. I knew I could not let this destroy me entirely. Though every fiber of my being screamed that perhaps I already had been destroyed. And yet, as I stared out at the rain, streaked streets, a small, stubborn part of me refused to let go entirely. Maybe there would be moments, fragments of time, where her gaze would linger on me, where a whisper of my name would reach her heart. Maybe, just maybe, love could still find a way through this unbearable ache. But for now, all I could do was sit in the empty house, listening to the rain, and mourn the life that had slipped from my grasp. The life where I was her world, her mother, her everything. And I wondered, quietly, painfully, if she would ever need me again, or if I had already been replaced completely. She didn't notice my tears that day, didn't see the hollow look in my eyes as I watched her run into her new mother's embrace once more. Her laughter, bright and unguarded, cut through me like a knife, and I forced a tight, lipped smile, pretending that everything was fine while inside I was crumbling. I followed them from a distance, keeping my presence invisible. Watching the life I once shared with her being lived, somewhere I could no longer reach. At home, the silence was deafening. The walls, once echoing with her giggles and tiny footsteps, now seemed cold and oppressive. I wandered from room to room, touching the surfaces she had touched, inhaling the faint scent of her hair and her clothes, as if I could summon her back through memory alone. But memory could not hold her. It could not stop her from calling someone else. Mom could not prevent her from seeing me as a stranger who once loved her fiercely, but now was somehow insufficient. I tried to reach out to her that evening, offering her a cup of hot cocoa and a gentle hug, hoping that in the quiet comfort of our home, she might remember me, even just a little. But she pulled away politely, and my heart splintered into 1,000 pieces. Her eyes, warm and kind, were not filled with the same desperation, the same longing, the same need for me that I felt for her. They belonged elsewhere now. And still, I did not push, did not scream, did not cry out the words I wanted to spill. Because even in my pain, I did not want to burden her, did not want to poison the small happiness she had found with someone else. Nights became the hardest. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the wind howling outside, feeling the empty space where her laughter used to dwell. I would imagine her little hands in mine, the way she used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, the tiny way she would curl against me, as if the world outside did not exist. I could almost hear her whisper, almost feel the warmth of her small body against mine. But it was always just out of reach. I would reach for her in the night, only to grasp nothing but cold sheets and shadows. Days stretched endlessly. I moved through them in a haze, performing the routines of life mechanically. Making tea, tidying the house, answering work emails. But my mind was elsewhere. Always elsewhere. At school, I avoided other parents, unable to watch them laugh with their children, while my own child had been taken by circumstance or choice. I could not yet tell which. Even her father's visits, rare and awkward as they were, reminded me of the past I could no longer inhabit. Every smile she gave him, every hug, every fleeting look of recognition felt like a betrayal of the bond I thought was unbreakable. Then came the whispers, the soft questions from neighbors and friends, careful, pitying voices that cut deeper than anything else. How is she adjusting? They would ask. Does she call you mom at home? And I would nod, silently, with a smile that did not reach my eyes. Because what could I say? That she no longer called me mom. That the word that had once been my entire existence now belonged to another woman. It was a truth too painful to voice aloud, too sharp to expose to the world. And so I carried it silently, like a wound that would not heal. One evening, I found myself standing outside their home, just across the street, watching her through the window as she played on the floor with her new mother. The way she laughed, the way she reached out for the other woman's hand, It was unbearable. Yet, I could not turn away. My heart ached with a love so fierce and raw, it seemed it might tear me apart. I whispered her name softly, a fragile hope that perhaps, even from afar, she would hear me, even for a fleeting moment. But she did not. She was lost in a world I no longer belonged to. In those long, quiet hours, I reflected on every choice, every word, every moment that had led us here. Had I failed her somehow? Was it my fault that she found solace in someone else's arms? Or was life simply cruel, handing me a child I loved beyond reason, only to teach me the unbearable lesson that love alone cannot secure a heart? My mind circled endlessly around these questions, answers always just beyond my reach. I began writing letters to her, letters I would never send. I poured my heart onto paper, describing my love for her, my regrets, my longing. Each word was a shard of my soul, and yet, each one felt hopeless. Would she ever rid them? Would she ever know? Would she ever understand the depth of the emptiness I now carried? The truth was, she was already living a life without me. A life where my presence was an echo rather than a certainty. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of my absence became a permanent companion. Friends reached out with words of comfort, but none could touch the void. I stopped attending school events, stopped trying to force my way back into her world. I could no longer bear the sharp pangs of watching her love someone else, so I withdrew, retreating into the one place where I could be alone with my grief. And yet, even in my withdrawal, I could not extinguish the stubborn, flickering hope inside me. A hope that maybe, somehow, she would remember that the bond we shared, the bond forged from her first cries, her first steps, her first words, could survive the presence of another woman in her life. Maybe, in some quiet, secret corner of her heart, she still needed me. But that hope was fragile, delicate as a spider's web in a storm. And as I lay awake on nights, when the world seemed impossibly cruel, I felt the truth pressing against me, relentless and cold. My daughter was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I didn't know if I could survive that truth. But I could not stop loving her. Not now. Not ever. The mornings grew colder, the air sharper, as winter settled over the city. Each day, I walked the same route to her school, the same route home, pretending that the steps I took were mine alone, not part of a silent, unacknowledged pursuit. I would see her from a distance sometimes, sitting on the playground with her new mother nearby, a picture of laughter and warmth that should have been mine. Each sighting tore at me with the same intensity as the first, though I tried, desperately, to convince myself that I was stronger now. At home, I wandered the rooms like a ghost, touching the furniture, the curtains, the corners of spaces she had once inhabited, trying to conjure the memory of her in them, trying to hold her somewhere tangible, somewhere real. I would close my eyes and imagine her small hand slipping into mine, her voice calling me, "Mom," in the softest whisper, the way she used to before the world changed. But the reality always returned, harsh and unyielding. She was no longer mine in that way. Not fully. Not ever. I found myself searching for explanations, looking for moments where I could pinpoint a misstep, a failure, some fragment of inadequacy that had allowed another woman to step into my place. I replayed our interactions endlessly. The bedtime stories I had read, the scraped knees I had kissed, the nights I had spent awake watching her breathe. And yet, in every memory, I could find nothing that deserved this loss. And that knowledge, that bitter truth, left me empty. Sometimes, I wanted to scream, to shake her gently, and demand that she remember, that she call me back, that she need me again. But I did not. I could not. One evening, she came home later than usual. The sky had turned a bruised purple, the first snow beginning to dust the streets in soft, tentative flakes. I waited by the window, hoping for the briefest glance in my direction. Some sign that she still recognized me, still acknowledged the mother who had carried her for 9 months, who had loved her beyond measure. She appeared finally, laughing at something her new mother had said. Her small coat zipped tightly around her, scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon. She looked radiant in the falling snow. A little princess in a world that no longer belonged to me. I wanted to run to her, to hold her in my arms, to feel the warmth of her against me, but my feet refused to move. I stayed by the window, watching her disappear into the house with a smile that I once believed existed for me alone. My chest ached, a raw, unrelenting pain. And I clutched the windowsill, knuckles white, whispering her name into the cold winter air, hoping it would somehow reach her, hoping it would remind her, even for a fleeting second, of the bond that could never be broken, though it could be ignored. Nights were the cruelest. I would lie awake in my bed, the ceiling above me a blank canvas for the memories of her small hands and her soft voice. I would imagine her crawling into my arms, whispering that she missed me, that she loved me, that she still needed me. And in those moments, I could almost feel her, almost touch her, almost hear the gentle beat of her heart against mine. But then, invariably, morning would come, and with it, the unbearable reality that she belonged to another world now. A world where I was an outsider, a visitor only in memory. The letters I wrote to her multiplied. I filled notebooks with my thoughts, my regrets, my confessions, my love. I wrote of the sleepless nights, of the early mornings, of the moments that had once seemed insignificant, but were now monumental in my recollection. I wrote of my longing, my fear, my heartbreak. Each word was a piece of me left on the page, a desperate attempt to reach her where my presence could no longer do so. I folded them neatly, stacked them, and left them untouched in a drawer. Sending them would have been futile. She would never read them, at least not now. And so I wrote for myself, for the memory of what once was, for the hope that one day, somehow she might understand. Winter deepened. Snow fell heavier, blanketing the world in silence, and with it, my loneliness grew. I wandered the streets aimlessly. The world around me, moving in its normal rhythm, while mine had fractured and scattered into fragments I could not piece together. I saw other children laughing with their mothers, felt the warmth of families that were whole, and my chest ached with the knowledge that my daughter's warmth, her laughter, her smile belonged elsewhere. The sight was both comforting and devastating. Proof that love existed. Proof that I could not have it back. It was during one of these walks, in the muted twilight of a snow-dusted evening, that I saw her pause at a shop window, pressing her small hands to the glass, eyes wide with wonder. She turned slightly, catching a glimpse of the falling snow, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. Not fully, not in recognition, but in something fragile, something that hinted at memory. At the bond that could not be erased entirely. My heart stuttered. I wanted to call to her, to tell her that I was here, that I loved her, that I had always loved her. But I remained still, frozen in the snow, knowing that even the briefest step toward her could shatter her world, as much as mine. I returned home, that night with cold hands and a numb heart. The house felt impossibly large, impossibly empty, and I sat by the window, staring at the soft blanket of snow, wondering if she would ever remember the times before, the nights spent in quiet lullabies, the moments when she had fit perfectly in the world I had built for her. I wondered if she would ever call me again with that simple, irreplaceable word, Mom, spoken not out of obligation, but out of love, the way it had once been. I didn't know if she would, but I couldn't stop hoping. I began to notice the small things first. The way her laughter sometimes lingered in my memory, long after she had gone. The way a phrase she once said would catch in my throat unexpectedly. The way a smell, a sound, a sight could instantly pull me back to the days when I was the center of her world. It was a cruel kind of torture, these reminders of what I had lost. Yet I clung to them desperately. They were proof that she had once been mine, proof that love could exist so fiercely. It could never be erased entirely. One evening, I found myself at the edge of the park, where she used to play. Snow crunching under my boots. The world muffled by winter's quiet. I watched from a distance as children ran past, their cheeks flushed, their voices ringing with joy. And there she was, my little girl, chasing a bright red scarf across the snow, laughter spilling from her like sunlight. I could see her smile, could see the glimmer in her eyes, and for a moment, it was like the years hadn't passed at all. I wanted to call her name, to run into the snow, and sweep her into my arms. But something inside me held me back. I could not risk the fragile life she now had, could not intrude upon the happiness that was not mine to take. And so I stood there, a silent witness to a life I had helped create, but could no longer fully inhabit. My heart ached with longing, with grief. with the unbearable weight of love that could not protect, could not reclaim, could not sustain. I remembered the first time she had called me Mom, the way her small tongue had struggled over the word, the way her eyes had shone with trust and affection. That word had been my universe, and now it belonged to another. The nights grew longer, colder, and I found myself wandering the house, touching objects, following routines, as if the mere act of motion could anchor me in a world that had shifted beneath my feet. I would set her plate on the table, even when she wasn't home, imagining her tiny fingers picking at the food, imagining her telling me about her day. I would lay out her clothes, her school bag, her shoes, as if by some magic. The act could summon her back into my presence. But each day, she returned not to me, but to another woman's embrace. And I felt the empty space in my arms grow with each passing moment. Letters multiplied, each one a testament to the depth of my love, the sharpness of my sorrow, the endless ache that refused to abate. I wrote of the mornings I spent watching her sleep, of the nights I had cried in silence while she dreamed peacefully, of the hope I had carried for her future. I wrote of my fear, my guilt, my despair, and my unwavering love. Each letter was a fragment of my soul, pressed into paper, never sent, a private chronicle of grief and devotion that no one would ever read. I began to understand, slowly, painfully, that this love, this fierce, unrelenting, all-consuming love, was not meant to be possessive. It was not meant to tether her to me, to demand her attention, to insist upon recognition. It was meant to exist quietly, even in absence, even when unacknowledged. My love was a shadow that would follow her, a warmth she might never feel, a truth she might never see, and yet it remained unbroken, indestructible, invisible, but unwavering. And then, one late afternoon, I saw her looking back at me through the fogged glass of the bus shelter. She was wrapped in her coat, scarf tight around her neck, eyes wide with curiosity, a small hand pressed to the glass. For a fleeting moment, she searched the street, and our eyes met. Not fully, not with understanding, but with recognition. A tiny spark that whispered of memory, of connection, of a bond that could not be erased. I smiled, a broken, trembling smile, and waved softly, knowing that she might not see me fully, that she might not know what she was seeing, and yet it was enough. I realized then that perhaps this was the nature of love. Not possession, not claim, but endurance. It could survive absence, survive distance, survive replacement. It could exist quietly, invisibly, yet powerfully, shaping her life, even when I could not be present, guiding her in ways I would never know, protecting her from afar. And in that understanding, a fragile peace began to take root in my chest. A quiet acceptance that though I was no longer the center of her world, I remained a constant, unshakable force in her life. The snow fell heavier that night, drifting softly against the window panes. I sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, a stack of unsent letters on the table beside me. I did not know if she would ever call me Mom again. I did not know if she would ever come back to me fully. But I knew that my love for her had not faded. It could not fade. It was part of me, as essential as breath, as permanent as the beating of my own heart. And in that truth, I found the strength to continue, to survive the unbearable ache, to endure the quiet, persistent absence of the child I had loved with every fiber of my being. I would not let the world take away my love for her, even if it had taken her from me. I would carry it, fiercely and silently, through every cold morning, every lonely night, every unspoken moment. Because love like this, love that had been forged in sleepless nights and endless worry and boundless joy, could not be broken. And so I waited, not knowing when, or if, or how, for the day she might see me again. Not as a stranger, not as a shadow, but as the mother she once called Mom, and still, in some small, hidden corner of her heart, might still need. The first warmth of spring arrived timidly, brushing the edges of the city with soft green hints and the faint scent of blossoms carried on the wind. I walked the familiar streets again, my steps slower, heavier, yet somehow steadier than in the long months past. The snow had melted, leaving puddles that reflected the fragile sunlight, and I noticed the life around me. The children running, the mothers chatting, the world moving forward without pause. I carried with me the quiet knowledge that my daughter's world had moved forward too, that she had grown into spaces I no longer fully occupied, and yet I was still part of her, even in ways unseen. It was late afternoon when I saw her again, skipping lightly along the sidewalk, her small hand held firmly in her new mother's. She turned slightly, as if sensing someone watching, and her eyes caught mine. I froze, the air around me trembling with unspoken tension, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended. Recognition flickered in her gaze. Not complete, not fully formed, but enough to stir something deep and aching within me. I waved tentatively, and she hesitated, a small, uncertain smile tugging at her lips, before she returned her attention forward. I wanted to cross the street, to sweep her into my arms, to feel her heartbeat against mine. But I stayed rooted, understanding that some moments demanded patience, not possession. I had learned, painfully, that love could not always claim what it desired. Sometimes, love's truest form was in the silent watching, the quiet presence, the invisible bond that survived even absence. And so I stood there, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face and the stubborn, enduring love that had never left me, never faded, never wavered. Days passed, and the encounters became small, fleeting. Glimpses from across streets, soft waves, brief exchanges of smiles. Each one was a thread connecting me to her, fragile yet unbroken. I began to notice the subtle changes in myself, the way I could sit with my grief without being swallowed by it, the way I could remember her with longing without being consumed entirely, the way I could love her freely, even without her immediate presence or acknowledgement. The achy remained, but it no longer defined me. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, she ran to me, unprompted. Drawn perhaps by some memory lodged deep within her heart, she stumbled slightly on the uneven pavement, and I caught her gently, holding her close, feeling the small warmth of her body against mine. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, searching, and whispered softly, "Mums." My heart faltered, 1,000 emotions converging in that single, fragile word. I held her tighter, tears blurring the edges of the moment, and whispered back, "I'm here, my love. I've always been here." It was not the return to the life we once had. It was not a reclamation, nor a reset. It was a beginning, a fragile, tender recognition that despite the time, despite the distance, despite the other woman who had held her in my absence, the bond we shared had endured. She had grown. She had changed. She had loved in other ways, but the core of us, the connection forged from the first breath she took, remained unbroken. We walked home together slowly, hands intertwined, the world around us continuing its relentless motion. For the first time in months, I felt a cautious hope, a delicate warmth that hinted at possibility. Love, I realized, could survive absence, could endure displacement, could heal even the deepest wounds. It was not possession, not claim, not control. It was devotion. Steadfast and eternal, waiting patiently for recognition, for acknowledgement, for the small flickers of connection that could never be extinguished. That night, as I tucked her into bed, I lingered a moment longer than usual, breathing in the faint scent of her hair, memorizing the curve of her small hand as it rested against mine. She looked up sleepily, eyes half closed, and murmured, "Love you, Mom." And I whispered back, my voice breaking but full of truth, "Love you too, my darling. Always." For the first time in a long while, the ache inside me softened. It would never disappear entirely. That was impossible. But it became a quiet companion. A reminder of how fiercely I had loved, how deeply I had endured, and how unwaveringly that love would remain, no matter where life carried us. I sat by the window later, watching the stars blink softly against the dark sky, and understood finally that love is not measured by possession or proximity. Love is measured by endurance, by patience, by the quiet strength to wait, to hope, to hold on even when everything seems lost. And in that enduring love, in the unwavering devotion, I found peace. My daughter slept peacefully, the word, "Mom," resting gently on her lips, and I knew, deep within, that no one could ever take that away. The storm had passed. The achy remained, but so did hope. And I finally understood that both could coexist. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to breathe,